I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14. Here tonight, special guest Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews. If you do not have his magazine, it is a must have for college football fans. Brett, thank you for joining us tonight as we talk the SEC.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris, and thanks for the praise there on my preview book. It's the 11th annual season doing it, first time in hard copy edition, and I say 11 years. This is the 11th, the most challenging of all 11 to produce because of all the coaching changes, the transfer portal, player movement, just the uncertainty around the sport overall. So excited to break it down. The SEC is loaded again with ranked teams. They have 7 in my top 25, so excited to break it down with you guys.
Yeah, it is challenging for sure, and the league is just really challenging to pick. I mean, there's some obvious things with Georgia and Alabama and maybe Texas A&M. We'll get into that in a minute, but starting on that note, Brett, when you do a publication, especially one that goes into print, as yours does, there's a lag between when you write everything up and when it goes public, and then stuff starts happening after that. You had a big injury at Wake Forest to Sam Hartman, their quarterback, who coincidentally Vanderbilt will see early in the season. But point is, things like that happen constantly. So from the time that you publish your picks to now, has there been anything that has happened or could happen that would really make you rethink the way that you have sized up the SEC?
Well, it's a great question. When you compare to the other preseason magazines that are on newsstands, they hit publish in April and May, and they're on newsstands come May, June, and they're locked in place. But what I've done with Pick Six Previews, I release it a lot later than most. I hit publish there mid-July, and it arrives at mailboxes end of July. So, and that's partly by design because with the transfer portal and all this movement from players, it happens after spring ball. After players lose their position battles in spring ball, they're looking for new homes. So when the other publications are hitting print in April, I mean, these rosters look completely different. I mean, you had Jordan Addison, the Blitnikoff winner, leaving Pittsburgh for USC, a multitude of other big athletes going to USC, not to pick on them, but it's everywhere. So I think I'm the most up-to-date in terms of release date out there. Now, with the SEC, not much really has changed from when I hit publish July 15. It's kind of, it's kind of a down period, and it's before fall camp. So there are going to be some fall camp battles that happen, especially at quarterback in the conference. But no, I feel pretty confident with the rankings I have. The only change might have been Wake Forest. You just mentioned that with Sam Hartman's uncertainties over in the ACC, but I actually have them 5th in the Atlantic anyway. I have them lower than most, so that wouldn't have altered anything that way.
So with the SEC, you've got quarterback battles, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, lots of places. What are the big storylines that you're really keeping an eye on in fall camps?
Well, it's got to start there. It is the quarterback battles. It's the coaching changes, especially Brian Kelly coming to LSU. That's one of the more variable teams out there. Just they have so much roster talent, but they're a thin roster. They had 37 scholarship players in their bowl game. So it could be a multi-year rebuild there. Another overarching angle in the East is how quickly will these big recruiting classes translate into on-field success? Because you had teams and programs like Kentucky, South Carolina, Missouri, even Vanderbilt, all hitting 5- and 10-year highs in recruiting in this February signing day. But the question becomes, how quickly does that translate? Is that more of a 2022 season thing, or is that going to be 23, 24, and beyond? So that's one serious thing to look at there in the East. And then lastly, just overall as a conference, which has stood out, and again, I've been doing this 11 seasons, going through the Power 5 leagues. This has to be the deepest the SEC has been at quarterback. When I do my all-SEC teams, trying to parse it down to just two names in this conference was incredibly difficult. You could have gone 8, 9 names there. So, so a lot of talent at quarterback. These programs, they continue to recruit the best in the country. They've really harnessed the modern tools of the game, the transfer portal, the modern offenses. So, no news flash here, but the SEC, again, the top conference in the nation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. The storylines with quarterbacks this year, there's just some amazing talent in the league. And I think just the league, obviously you have Alabama and Georgia at the top, right? And I think everybody expects a separation between them. And Texas A&M could be thrown into there too, depending on how quickly young talent develops and quarterbacks settle and all those things. But it just seems to me, it's very interesting to me in that 3 to 4 to 12 range in the league this year. I just think there's going to be a lot of weeks where you look at games and just say, man, this one is a toss up almost.
Yeah, it's true. I think the middle tier of the conference has consistently improved, especially this last cycle. These last round of coaching hires seem to all be home runs when you talk about Arkansas, Sam Pittman, the Mississippi schools with Kiffin and Leach, and then over in the East, Heupel and Shane Beamer. They both shared the FWAA's Steve Spurrier Award that goes to the best first-year head coach. They shared it. So a lot of, all these programs are trending in the right direction. I hate to hear national guys where they say, oh, the SEC, it's just Bama, Georgia, and 12 other schools. That's very misleading. I mean, of course, those two are superpower programs right now, but you throw A&M in the Pac-12, they're winning the conference. You throw Arkansas in the Pac-12, they're probably going to win the conference. So it's just such a deep division in the West and an overall deep conference that there's really no given Saturday.
Okay, when you make your picks, SEC fan bases are passionate. I'm sure you got blowback from somebody somewhere on where you picked their team. Who or where did you get the most blowback on your SEC picks?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's always tough to grade the SEC West and forecast them because it's really 7 strong programs. I hate putting someone 6th or 7th over there because they might contend for other divisions elsewhere. But yeah, Auburn fans, I have Auburn last in the West this year. They're one of the only programs that seem pointed down while the rest were improving year to year. LSU down at 6th. That also felt odd putting them that low, just given their track record and history. But those two, I think actually the one that got the most pushback might have been South Carolina at number 5 in the East, just because of all the positive momentum that they had in the transfer portal. They really opened up the pinata back in December with the first big headliner transfer of Spencer Rattler and his tight end Austin Stogner. That really opened up the whole player carousel for the year. But a lot of positive momentum there. I think some Gamecock fans, when they got the book, they were hoping to see the Gamecocks up there in the top 25 or competing for the East, but I still think they're a year or two away. So I'd probably say that Carolina fans were the most upset, but I've been on a couple shows. I was on Spurs Up Show on ESPN Charleston today, and they understand the ranking, but still, it's a lot of optimism.
When you were making your picks, where did you have the most problem sorting out who going ahead of who?
Yeah, so it's got to be the SEC East after Georgia. This battle for
Yeah.
second place in the East is just brutal to pick. And I think it's the hardest division, or at least the hardest 4-team pack to pick besides the Big Ten West this year for me. That was another jumbled division of a lot of above average teams. Hard to parse them out. But I'd say the East here, and especially that race for second, third, fourth. I ended up going with Tennessee just based on how incredible their offensive turnaround was last year. I think we forget, but 2 years ago, this was an old smash mouth 1980s power offense under Jeremy Pruitt. And Josh Heupel comes in not just to change the whole offensive structure, but through all those, the investigation going on. They were hit by the portal bad last offseason. So for him to turn it around that quickly, I was really impressed statistically and by watching them. So I have Tennessee there on their offense alone. You got to think the defense takes a step forward. At third place, really a tie between Florida and Kentucky, and we might go into these deeper, but you have a new coaching change year with Billy Napier at Florida, more of a recruiting pipeline there than you would at Kentucky, but conversely, Kentucky has been great at player development, so they bring in 3 stars and they turn them into NFLers, so a lot of respect for Kentucky there. But that was definitely the hardest 4-team pack in this league and one of the most in the country.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you separated those 3 teams if you didn't answer it right there where you did. But with Tennessee, and you have covered a lot of football, you've seen a lot of changes. You have a pretty good grasp on timelines and how long it takes for teams to adjust to this or that. I thought that what Josh Heupel did at Tennessee last year was amazing for all the reasons you said. Plus, when you're changing from a defensive coach who had an awful offense, most of the time coaches who are defensive minded are going to take their best athletes and put them on that side of the ball. And then the transfer portal, as you mentioned, it just was amazing to me to see how well that went for them in year one. I guess the question that everybody has next, though, some say that offense is easy to figure out and people are going to figure it out and they might get dragged back down to earth offensively a little bit. I don't know that I believe it, but I've heard it. I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about Mike Leach but that's not really hurt him. So with all that, what do you think of that criticism of Tennessee and maybe with their offense being simple, people figure them out a little bit this year?
Well, it's interesting. I think that if there is going to be some figuring out that's done by opposing defensive coordinators, and maybe you take a step back, but I want to offset that. They're going to get some gains too, some efficiency gains from these players being in the whole system for all those bowl practices, a full spring ball, a full fall camp, compared to last year just learning the whole system in a quick offseason. So I like to see that second year coach bonus, if not offset the learning curve by other opposing defensive coordinators. I think it'll be about a net even there. So I think they're going to be great on offense. You look at 4 offensive linemen back. They brought in Brew McCoy, a 5-star transfer receiver. He's been all over the place, but I think finally has a good home here at Tennessee. But really, the guy, the difference maker is Hendon Hooker, a quarterback, a transfer in from Virginia Tech. When he took over the offense, it was night and day, and he's back, and a lot to like. And this is a kind of team that they go so fast tempo. It's the fastest snap count in the country, snaps per minute and all that. So they wear out teams. Yeah, it might be somewhat basic of play schemes, but you're going to exhaust opponents, and that you can wear them down. And I really like what they showed last year. And then one last thing, to put it historically, the last 10 years since I've been covering, doing my book, this was one of the biggest offensive turnarounds year to year. It's right up there with the Deshaun Watson taking over at Clemson in 2014 and 15, up there with TCU, and they modernized before their near playoff run in 2014. So just statistically, this was a out of nowhere surprise and one of the biggest turnarounds ever.
Brett, when you were differentiating between those 3 teams, when you got to Kentucky, and I say the same thing a little bit about that coaching staff, it's defense first. That's where that identity is. But they lost a lot of key defenders from last year and also some key offensive linemen. I guess that factored a lot in how you separated Kentucky from Florida and Tennessee.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But I do have a ton of respect for Mark Stoops and the way that they built this offensive line. They call it the Big Blue Wall. And, to put it into context, from 1985 to 2018, so about a 30-year stretch there, almost 40-year stretch, they only had 5 offensive linemen drafted to the pros. Wow. And then to put it this way, they have 5 the last 4 years. So 5 in 40 years, 5 in 4 years. I mean, they're really changing the culture of that program. It's shown in their power physical run game. They do get Chris Rodriguez back. A little bit of off-the-field questions. I don't know how many games he'll be available for, but I do like Cavassier Smoke there anyway. Will Levis is getting a ton of NFL draft hype, and he certainly has the big frame, and he played well last year. So I like that. And then, you touched on their defense. That's been consistently strong in the front 7. Some personnel change and their coordinator change too, but enough to keep them near the top 25. That gets lost in all the debating. I still think they're a great team. I have them 28th nationally, but in the East, that's only good for a third-place tie with Florida.
Yeah, for Florida, obviously the coaching change, I think the culture is going to be a lot different. There'll be a lot more discipline. Change at quarterback, probably one for the better. Richardson is just incredibly talented, but they've got some depth issues along a lot of places on that team. I think that's an issue, along with obviously the change of schemes and stuff like that. I'm thinking, though, I don't know that I want to play Florida, but I'm thinking if I do, I'd rather catch them earlier in the season than later. Is that how you see them too?
Yeah, I think about that for coaching transition years. Definitely, it's going to be a different team week 1 against a top 5 Utah team than it will be come rivalry weekend against Florida State. They're going to grow as the season goes on, especially a young quarterback, Anthony Richardson, and a lot of 5-star talent all over the place. They've recruited really well. I think they can still unlock a higher tier in recruiting, and that's one of the reasons that they hired Napier. He talks about bringing, his quotes, an army of staffers. He hired so many, recruiting assistants, on-field analysts. Name your analyst, he's got it now. And I think it's going to unlock a big recruiting machine that Florida used to have and is going to bring back. But as it relates to 2022, transition season. But this is a team, when I go through my numbers, they shock me at times of how actually good they were. The offensive line was in the top 5 of both my run push and my pass pro stats. It's kind of shocking. Maybe some of that was Richardson's scramble ability, but some of those stats you can't fake. So I think they were better than the record showed. I think with the coaching distractions at the end of last season in November, they kind of fell off. But I think there's a lot of underlying talent and a higher ceiling than some of the other teams in the East.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was having that conversation with someone today. I mean, people forget they darn near beat Alabama back
Yep.
in September, and then what was it? 6 weeks later, they're almost losing to, gosh, I've already forgotten who they
Yeah,
played in the
Sanford.
FBS. Yes, and not like this wasn't like Eastern Washington or North
Uh-huh.
Dakota State. I mean, this was ordinary Sanford. I have to think that a lot of what went on last year was just kids mailing it in.
Yeah, I think so. Especially think of their mindset. They were fresh off of an SEC title appearance. They had Alabama close that time too in Atlanta in a shootout. And then you fast forward to 2021, and yeah, you take a tough loss to Alabama, where actually Florida outgained them by 100 yards. One of the only teams to outgain Alabama. They actually ran all over that defense. It's kind of hard to believe looking back. But yeah, that was a close one. And then you had some swing games too that were one-score losses that really could have flipped. Kentucky, LSU, both by 7 points. And that's not to rewrite history, but that is to put yourself in their shoes of, man, now you're talking you're 3-3 heading into the rest of the schedule. And it kind of fell off when the circus started to start with Coach Mullen. And yeah, so long story short, yeah, I think they are better than that record showed. They graded out above average in my game grader despite the losing record. And yeah, I think you're going to see a whole new caliber of team this year.
We've not hit on two teams and kind of glossed over Georgia, so I want to hit those three teams before we go to the West. Let's start with Georgia. I know it lost an incredible amount of talent, I believe 15 guys to the NFL, but when you watched them last year and looked at the stat sheet, it was amazing how many people they played. I don't think I've ever seen a deeper defense. There's talk that some of the players on that starting unit are better than some of the ones they had a year ago. We'll wait and see how that develops, but what's your take on Georgia? I know the schedule is, I think, hands down the easiest in the league, and that certainly is not going to hurt.
Yeah, schedule stands out. Their 5-year and 3-year recruiting trends stand out. They're right up there with Alabama as the best in that category. So you just know there's talent stockpiled. The staff has proven themselves. I know they lose Dan Lanning, the coordinator, to Oregon. But yeah, I've been asked the same question, and you had the same answer I like to use, is that when you look at when you watch Georgia play, their defense, and you look at their snap counts, they rotate more than anybody. They had so many 5-star bodies and players that they had specific roles and situations for guys. So yeah, you lose on paper, 7 or 8 starters, but you bring back so many guys that were in the rotation. And quite honestly, they're just next year's first round picks. So you can talk about, oh, it's 7 new starters. Well, look at who they are. They're all 5-star guys who are going to have their name called in the next April. So I still have them in my playoff. I have them to win the East, and I think that it's undeniable the talent level that they've stockpiled over there. So, and that's not even to talk about the offense, which really doesn't get enough credit. On a per-play basis, they're really strong. A vertical pass game has been unlocked under Stetson Bennett and coordinator Todd Monken. The tight end room is incredible. I mean, probably 4 guys could start anywhere in the country. So a lot to like from Georgia, despite the big NFL draft exodus. I still think they're playoff caliber.
Vandy and Georgia, Missouri and Vanderbilt were your picks for 5 and 6. I think that's most folks' picks for 5 and 6. Both programs going through different stages of rebuilds. Vanderbilt's certainly a total rebuild. Missouri's is, I don't know what you call it, and that's the one where I think I wonder most about fit between head coach and school long term. But what's your assessment of where both those programs are?
Yeah, well, we'll start with Missouri. They had a decade plus under Gary Pinkel, a consistent winner, and then Barry Odom. And those guys were great at what they did. But as the game evolved, as the recruiting game evolved more towards social media and branding and all this, they weren't really, that wasn't their cup of tea. So what Missouri does, they go and hire a guy just like it. And, with Eli Drinkowitz, he called it New Zoo was the branding movement. And really the goal was to lock down talent from the Show Me State. And he's pulling it off. You look at this on paper in 2021, a top 30 class. That's solid. But then last year, a top 15 class at Missouri. That's completely unheard of. It's 5 stars at the offensive skill positions. But though for 2022, I still think they're a year away. I think that this is a great potential for a few years from now. And the quarterback spot's unsettled. So I see another rebuilding year for Missouri, but a great long-term trajectory should this recruiting continue to surge. Missouri as a high school football state too, hitting their best talent in a long time. So that's a good time to be hitting the in-state recruits. Similar story with Vanderbilt. I think it's a longer-term rebuild at Vandy. That's no surprise. And first off, my hat's off to you, Chris. One of the best out there, if not the best, covering the Vandy beat. And in past years, preparing for my book, it's been exclusively I've been listening into your shows and your work. So congrats on that. And again here, yeah. So I think they made the right hire with Clark Lee. He's an alumni. He clearly is passionate about his school and the area. Getting creative too with some hires. They got the financial commitment they've been waiting for finally. So I could see it shifting. It might be longer term than people thought originally, but I think it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you for the nice words. I can second that. It's a long rebuild, but haven't seen a lot of them this fall in fall camp or this summer in fall camp. They're on their way with the talent. I don't know how long it's going to take, but there's a plan and a purpose there, and I think that's at least some cause for some hope where there just really hasn't been much for 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah, I mean, right away you look at the recruiting. I hate to keep bringing that up, but that is kind of in this conference. It really rings true. You got to have the recruits to compete on the field, and yeah, he just coming off of a 1-win or 2-win season, 2-10. He signs a top 30 recruiting class in the country. That's really impressive. It's something to build upon. It's kind of a proof of concept for them going forward. And a couple capable athletes at quarterback. Receivers look okay, and I think they take a step forward, but it's just tough sledding in the SEC East. I wrote this in the book where it's one thing if you're quote unquote rebuilding a program in the Pac-12. You could find some W's. You could scrape together a 5-7 or a 6-6. Not so much in the SEC, where every week is an absolute battle against top 20 recruiters. And so it's going to be tough. You got to win some of these non-conference games, get the momentum rolling, maybe steal that Wake Forest game now with the uncertainties of their quarterback spot and roll some momentum into conference play. But yeah, I think if we look back at Vanderbilt 2 or 3 years from now, it'll be definitely above where it is now. I think it's heading in the right direction.
Okay, Brett, let's go to the West. Of course, all discussion starts with Alabama. There's been talk of this is an all-time great-ish type Alabama team. I think that might be a little much, but certainly returning Heisman winner, hit the portal hard. I think you've got some uncertainty along the offensive line. And maybe some question marks, not question marks at receiver, but new faces, maybe a better way to put it. How do you see this Alabama team compared to most Alabama teams?
Well, I think it's certainly right up there, and that's a high caliber. That's a high bar to be compared to, but I have them number one in the SEC, and I have them number one overall preseason. It might sound like the boring answer, but it's kind of undeniable this year with Alabama. Usually the storyline heading into summer or heading into the offseason is, wow, look at all these guys they've lost to the pros. How will they replace 12 starters, blah, blah, blah. This time around, it's in quotes, only 7 players were drafted, and instead they return the Heisman winner. They return the nation's best defender, Will Anderson, 5 stars everywhere. And I hit on this earlier in the show, but Nick Saban, he's really harnessed all the modern tools of the game, all these new opportunities. He's really owning them, one being the transfer portal. The 2 areas that were kind of weaknesses or somewhat uncertainties that you hit on, receiver and line, he's patched them up with top transfers in the country. He brings in Jermaine Burton from Georgia, the receiver, the speedster Tyler Harrell from Louisville. So that's 2 big targets at receiver. And then even speaking Vandy, the 3-year Vandy starter, Tyler Steed, in offensive line. So, even if there were any somewhat thin positions on this superpower roster, transfer portal, he's really harnessed it and brought in guys. So I don't see any weaknesses. And also, they have some revenge factor, which is rare. They're coming off that loss to A&M on the field and on signing day, all that offseason drama. They're going to be fired up this year.
Yeah. How realistic is it for A&M to close the gap this year? I guess that sounds a little silly given that A&M beat them last year, but everybody knows there was a difference between those 2 teams the rest of the years. The top recruiting class of all time, according to some, but you don't usually win with freshmen playing big roles in the league all over the field. Not that that's going to be the case, but my point here would be that team still seems a little young. You've got a question mark at quarterback, maybe. At least you don't know who it's going to be yet, I guess. But how realistic is it to expect A&M to compete with Alabama for the title this year?
Yeah, so I think that with A&M, the true question, and they're a serious playoff contender, but it really comes down to this. how quickly will these 18 top 100 commits translate into on-field stars and all-conference caliber players? Does it happen as true freshmen? It's rare, and it's especially rare along the lines where they signed 4 or 5-star guys on that defensive line alone. And so my point on this is I think they're really a playoff contender in 2023. I think you're going to see all of that historic recruiting class have a year and a half plus on campus and in the program next year. As it relates to this year, yeah, I mean, if a couple breaks go their way, if they find an ace at quarterback, if they continue to stay healthy, and if some of these 5 stars translate right away, not all of them, but even a handful of them, yeah, they're definitely a playoff caliber team. So it's just a shame that they're stuck in this division. If you throw Texas A&M out in the Pac-12, I mean, they might win the whole conference outright, but stuck there with Alabama. There's no easy game. You got the Mississippi schools, Arkansas, and then you draw Miami too, a predicted coastal winner. So it's a tough schedule, and it starts fast. But yeah, they're definitely closing the gap on a program level. So give them a couple seasons, they're right there.
How did you sort out the 5 teams from there?
Well, yeah, we talked a little bit of great coaching hires, the 3 of them, Sam Pittman, Lane Kiffin, and Mike Leach. And then you have Bryan Harsin and Auburn. I'll start with them. I kind of threw them out right away. They started 5-2. They were ranked in the top 15, and then they just collapsed. They lost 6 straight games, I think it was, or 5 straight games. And then the offseason started. It got worse. They fired both coordinators. He had that whole offseason scandal, and they lost a lot of transfer players out. So Auburn seems like the only one that's heading in the wrong direction. I put them at 7th. Similarly with LSU, I saw a really thin roster in the bowl game. Their defense isn't what it used to be. You think of the old Chinese bandits, the old LSU defense. That's been gone for a couple seasons now, and I don't see an overnight fix. Again, a young roster, a coaching change roster. So I have them down at 6th. It felt weird to do it, but I have 6 and 7 as LSU Auburn. And then from there, I really like Mississippi State. I think I have a team, a diamond in the rough, no one's talking about. I've got them ranked in my top 25 even. When you look back at their season, 3 of their losses were total flukes. I hate to say that, but they were special team flukes where there was a muff punt that cost them the game, 3 missed field goals against Arkansas. You hit one of them, you win, stuff like that. So they were better than the record showed. My game grader formula says as much. They were ranked in my formula last year, going to be ranked again this year. So not even to speak to that offense. It's going to put up a ton of yards again. So I had them 5th. Ole Miss 4. With Lane Kiffin, he dubbed himself the Portal King. And when you make a moniker like that, you better back it up. He certainly did. Signing the 2nd best transfer class in America, only behind USC. So reloading at a lot of skill positions with 5-star guys. Still a big enough transition away from Matt Corral to fall out of contention for the West. But I have them 4th. And then lastly here, Arkansas. I have them 12th nationally, 3rd in the West. And we really saw this. It's happened quickly. It was a solid turnaround in 2020. But then in week 2 against Texas down in Fayetteville, you saw Arkansas turn from a rebuild into really a destination point. I mean, when they were destroying Texas and chanting SEC at them, you saw all these commits. I mean, all these recruits, they were catching their eye. And it made it a destination for the coordinators to stay around for another year, too. So I love their staff. I love their offensive line, their power run game. KJ Jefferson's, he's great at quarterback, just a total gamer. And I think they have a lot of W's on their schedule this year. So I had Arkansas 3rd.
Yeah, I think KJ Jefferson might be the most underrated player in the league. When you talked about all the quarterbacks, he's one that popped to mind. You're not seeing him on a lot of people's first 2 or 3 All-SEC teams, which I think is, again, as you said, more a statement about the quarterbacks in the league this year than it is about him. But I really like what he gives Arkansas.
Absolutely. I mean, he put up 9.1 yards per attempt, and that's good for number 5 in the country. And he's a big frame, 250 pounds. He can truck guys. He's not afraid to go run over the middle and truck defenders. But really sharp on his throws. Really don't find many weaknesses in his game. And a lot of their games last year evolved into shootouts, especially that Ole Miss game. And I remember just looking at the body language. He was ready for every challenge that was thrown his way. He had that killer instinct, if you will, as a quarterback, and the guys rallied around him. So, but a tough quarterback league. I think other guys will put up bigger stats just because Arkansas is so run heavy, and they led the conference in rushing. So why go away with what worked? But when the game is put onto his shoulders, he's probably him and Bryce Young are the 2 I'd want to have the ball with in a game tying or game winning situation.
Well, speaking of underrated quarterbacks, you got Will Rogers at State, who just puts up some video game numbers. You said something interesting in your preview. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but you made the point about year twos, and then I don't think these were your words, but last year was more like Mike Leach's 1.5, I guess, after the COVID year of 2020. And you mentioned how much better that offense got. I presume with all that experience coming back, you're seeing a jump there with them for all those reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Mike Leach and his air raid offense is that it's a very complex, big playbook, a Harry Potter sized playbook. It's a little index
Mm-mm.
card. It's like 5 plays, but the point is, it's all reps. Mike Leach, he talks about this in press conferences, in his book. It's all about reps. So he wants to rep that thing a million times in practice, so that when it comes to the game, they're always making the right decisions. So long story short, in 2020, they lost all that spring practice time. It was that weird offseason, if you remember. So all that install time was wasted. So really, 2021 became the transition season, and you saw some gains there. I really think you're going to see another boost in 2022. I also went back and studied his second and third year offenses at his prior two stops, Texas Tech and Washington State. You saw a big jump from year 1 to 2, and even bigger jump 2 to 3. So I think you're in for some of those efficiencies this year. I think he eclipses the 5,000 yard mark, which is the elusive number there. And really, what caught my eye the most was the defense. I mean, it was a strong unit last year, but they bring back the most experience in the SEC on defense. So I think you see a statistical gain on that side too.
Well, on the other side of that state, or the other part of that state, you got Ole Miss, which you mentioned the portal king in Lane Kiffin. They brought in a quarterback who may or may not win that job. And I'm looking at their schedule. They've got a nice little runway because their September is not going to be very hard before they play the big boys. How much do you think that helps as they transition in terms of a lot of personnel and really at the most important position where I thought Matt Corral was just tremendous a year ago?
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about a really intense quarterback battle. I think some of the national folks, when they saw Jackson Dart make the transfer from USC to Ole Miss, they just assumed he'd be the starter. But people forget Luke Altmaier, the incumbent. He battled hard last year. He filled in for times for Matt Corral, and it's really a two-man battle here into fall camp. So while I don't know who's going to emerge in fall camp, whoever that is will be a relatively new starter. And that September slate is perfect for that, for getting used to the new offense, meshing with his new teammates. I mean, it's Troy. It's an FCS team. You got Georgia Tech, who's rebuilding again, and Tulsa. I mean, that should be 4 Ws and good on-the-job training. And then even you open up with Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Auburn, who I have projected towards the bottoms of their division. So, yeah, you're right. The schedule is very favorable for a young team, which they are, especially a quarterback. So, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. And also with such a big transfer roster, too. I mean, some programs, you didn't have any transfer activity. Some you almost wholesaled out a class and a half, and that's one of them here. So for a new team to gel, that's a perfect slate for it.
Okay, you talked about the situation at Auburn with Bryan Harsin, and I think that was a tough situation to begin with. Then you look at the schedule, and it's really tough. What are the odds that Auburn fans are happy with Bryan Harsin at the end of the year? Because I just see, I mean, I don't want to do disrespect to their talent, but just between the situation and the schedule, if you've ever been set up for a recipe for disaster, that seems to be one.
Yeah, the Auburn coaching situation has been fascinating to me as a total outsider. I mean, I'm based out of Pennsylvania, and while I do cover the teams, I don't know the fan, the ins and outs with the fans and the boosters. So every year, I would think that Gus Malzahn is doing a solid job there, 9-10 wins. But then you talk to Auburn fans, they want him fired. It was going on for years and years. So finally, they bring in a new guy, Bryan Harsin, and they want to fire him right away too. So it's hard to imagine what goes on down there, but. Again, you look at the recruiting pipeline, they're always top 10, top 15 area. There's a lot of future NFLers on this roster. They seem pretty variable where they could surprise us and come out motivated and win some of these toss-up games, or they fall again like they did in November and stumble towards a last place finish. I thought the latter was more likely, just given the strength of the schedule and some of the more established teams on that schedule. But yeah, it seems like a total mess, and we'll see if he can turn it around in year 2 with 2 new coordinators.
Yeah, the thing I always say is there's the number of wins in the league never changes every year. And basically you got about 13 programs that think they should win a national title. which means somebody's always unhappy, right? And sometimes these things just pop up. Like, I don't know that you saw Dan Mullen being fired after the Alabama game. Obviously, Auburn would be the one where we're looking most for the hot seat situation. If you're looking for a pop-up situation where the season really goes wrong and people are unhappy and there's talk about firing of a coach or something, like, if you had to pick another one, who would you take
That's a
from
tough
the
one because,
SEC? Yeah.
yeah, it's really a tough one
Because
because
there's a lot of new coaches and
yeah,
that's the problem, or not the problem, but that's the difficulty.
yeah, you see a lot of first and second year coaches. I think that even in the second year, you kind of have a grace period, even in the SEC. Like, Shane Beamer at South Carolina. If Tennessee stumbles, Josh Heupel, I think they've all earned a third season based on their start. Maybe Missouri would be the only one I could think of here, unless there's an off the field altercation that we unforeseen. But speaking only to wins and losses, probably Missouri is the only candidate for that. If they tank, if they go something like 2, 3, 4 wins, and it seems that the recruiting pipeline dries up, that could be a candidate. But elsewhere, it seems like most of the conference is pretty content and loving their head coach. You go right down the barrel there. Arkansas, they love their guy, Sam Pittman. Ole Miss is scoring a ton of points. Mike Leach, that could be one there, actually, as I'm talking out loud. Mike Leach, I love his style. I love his authenticity. But if they have a losing season, I wonder if the hot seat warms up down there. Then you have first-year guys at LSU, at Florida, two of the more impatient fan bases out there. So you can't fire a guy after 1 year. So
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's all I got. Yeah, it's a tough question. It's probably just Missouri at this point.
Yeah, that's the one that I would have pointed to also. Which SEC team do you think has got the biggest range between potential wins and win numbers, top to bottom?
I think you go LSU with this question, and
Yeah.
I've been saying this on radio shows. It's LSU and Texas are the most variable out there.
Hmm.
With both of them, it's tough competition first, so that could start to tack on a lot of losses. LSU's defense has been down for a couple seasons, thin in the bowl game. I've hit on this already on the show, not to repeat, but also though that underlying talent is there, and they also brought in a ton of transfers, a top 5 transfer class. Brian Kelly, a proven winner in this sport at several different levels and conferences. So, I mean, they could go something 9-3, or they could also go 4-8. It's wide open for LSU.
All right, I think we've hit just about everybody, but give me the biggest storyline or two, whether that's something with a head coach or something else that involves this league that maybe we didn't touch on.
Ooh, well, we really hit on a lot. I mean, the one that comes to mind is how quickly does that Texas A&M blue chip class convert to all conference talent? That could be a variable team. If that gels right away, they're a playoff contender. Let's see what else. I mean, the transfers at South Carolina are intriguing. Is Spencer Rattler returning to his 2020 form as a Heisman candidate? If he is, or if he's anywhere near that, that could flip a lot of one-score games South Carolina's way. What else? The development of Tennessee's defense will go a long way in determining the East race. I think we have a proven offense there with Tennessee, but if that defense, I'm not saying they got to be top 10 over there, but if they bring a top 40 defense in Knoxville, that's a complete team. So that would be another storyline there. I think we've hit on a lot there. This is a great talk, going team by team. I think you have two legit national title contenders at the top with Bama and Georgia. A lot of fringe playoff candidates like A&M and Arkansas, and a lot of great, intriguing coaching hires in their first and second seasons. So exciting time, as always, down south.
Yeah, the one that I'm kind of watching as an outlier is A&M, because I'm just wondering, like, where do you set the bar for expectations for how happy the fans are? And this is what I mean. That schedule is not easy, man. Even their FCS game is not easy. Not that I expect Sam Houston State to take them into the fourth quarter, but I'm just saying that there's not a lot of layups on that schedule. You got Miami before you go to 4 games out of your home stadium. Expectations there are sky high. I'm just wondering, like, what does that look like with Jimbo Fisher and the fan base? If say, and I'm not predicting this, but it's the SEC, somebody's always unhappy. Say that goes to 8-4 or 7-5. You're sitting there going, the program's underachieved, but you got all those kids next year, presuming that they can be retained, that sets you up for a run potentially at a national title in 2023. That whole situation just fascinates me. Like, if they miss win-loss expectations, how does that fan base feel at the end of the season?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that what we saw in February with this historic signing class, it wasn't just number one this year. It was considered the number one of all time of the modern recruiting era. So I think what that does is it buys him not only one, probably buys him 2 full seasons to let that group develop and grow. I think that they're going to let that class play out and see what kind of heights it can bring. So, yeah, if they go 7-5, 8-4, you'll probably hear some complaints, and I'm sure the pressure will be turned up a little bit. But I don't see any firings happening. He did bring them to 10 wins there in a short season
Mm-hmm.
in 2020, a big bowl win, a big BCS bowl win I guess New Year's Six now. So he's bought himself some goodwill with the fan base. So I think that even a 7-5, he'd survive. Really though, that puts pressure on seeing this class through in 23 and 24. Gotta almost win the conference. I mean, I know it's a tall standard, a tall expectation, but when you're stacking top 5 national classes and the number 1 class, you got to win the league. So we'll see in a couple seasons.
Hey, Brett, this has been fantastic. It's been a lot of fun. Tell folks where they can buy your book, where they can follow you on Twitter, anything that you want to get out there to promote your stuff. The floor is yours to do that as we finish.
Oh, thanks again for having me. Thanks for the praise and for getting the book. It's pick6previews.com and pick6previews on Twitter. On the webpage there, I've got a couple sample teams so you can see what we're talking about here with the level of detail I go, my graphics, my stats, but then putting it back into readable terms. I mean, I'm talking to head coaches, talking to coordinators, watching spring games, trying to find the balance between numbers and X's and O's. So that's on there, pick6previews.com. A couple testimonials, too, from the college game day guys are great to see on there. So it's, you want to find that on pick6previews.com. And for the first time ever, I might add, after 10 years of digital only, of PDF only, this year bringing it to life with the hard copy. It's been surreal seeing it come to life. So we got both options available this time around.
Yeah, I have it. I'll hold it up to the camera as you're on audio so people can see it. The thing that I like about your book, Brett, and I buy all the main ones out there, but yours is a little different. It's got some history. It's got some stats on offense and defense. It's got some things translated. If you're sitting there thinking, okay, I've got my copy of Athlon's and Lindy's and whoever else, I promise you, if you buy Brett's book, you're going to get a different take on every team just because the way that you go about it is a little different.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was pretty much the goal. I always loved the preseason magazines growing up. I think it's an important staple of the game. You know, it's a tradition here since the 50s. But I always wanted to put my own angle on it. I wanted to find that mesh between stats, numbers, and then watching the games. And I always thought that they could go a little bit deeper too. And they might have had some page constraints and staff constraints, but it's a one-man show here. I'm doing all 66 Power 5 teams and digging in deep. So thank you for that praise. That was the goal, was to differentiate a little bit and bring a new flavor to the preview market. So that's great news.
Well, you've done it. Thanks for coming on. We'll do this again next year, and who knows, maybe sooner if we find the occasion.
Yeah, anytime, Chris. Thank you.
All right, thank you for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you back very soon here at Southeastern 14.